Hello and welcome to Dialogue. China has just concluded its annual two sessions meetings of the NPC and CPPCC, when work of the past year is reviewed and major targets are made for the coming year. Each year, journalists from all over the world come to Beijing to cover these decisive meetings. How do international journalists view the two sessions this year? What topics are they most interested in? And how do they walk the line between what they see on the ground and what Western audiences might expect? Today, we have some foreign journalists with us to share their insights on this year's two sessions. Join us for discussion today, live from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Well, joining me today are Rick Dunham, former White House correspondent for Business Week and visiting scholar at Tsinghua University, Professor Rosario Malindog-Uy, columnist of the Manila Times, and Zoon Ahmed Khan, founder of the Shandhe Review and research fellow at Center for China and Globalization. Welcome to Dialogue. So, Rick, I will start with you. Like, if you look at the, about a week-long sessions, political gathering, most important of the year, what's your impression? What impressed you the most?
Well, I think what impressed me the most was the relentless discipline of messaging and the focus on economic growth and quality of growth. The focus on high quality growth, the focus, the honesty about the challenges that face the Chinese economy, the policy proposals for reforming and trying to fix the problems in the banking industry, for example, and then to showcase some of the innovations, technological innovations, particularly artificial intelligence. I think it was, from a point of view of what you would call propaganda, it was well stage managed to show some of the highlights of China's advances. Particularly in a time where there is policy chaos in a country like my own in the United States. You saw the government roll out policy presentations in a pretty well-ordered way.
Well, that's people would call like the Chinese style, maybe. Zoon, what impressed you? All of you have participated in the coverage directly or indirectly, or must have followed closely about these very important meetings. So, what topics you find most interesting?
Thank you, Qinduo, firstly for having me. And first of all, I absolutely resonate with Rick Dunham when he says that there is certain honesty in the expectations, in the reality of challenges that China and quite frankly, the world faces. And I also think, when we talk about, obviously these meetings were a week long, a lot was covered, it was very in-depth. I think one of the first things that did impress me a lot is that the targets that have been set are realistic. They are based on existing track record. And for those who don't know, they're based also on the projections of the local governments and based on a realistic perspective, which is very important, especially in a time when there's so many, especially from, certain parts of the world, there's so much question marks on what China is capable of. China is really thinking about realistic goals. The second thing is obviously that China has, on the one hand, focused on AI, high tech, leading in these technologies globally, but at the same time stays very grassroots and down to earth. So these meetings covered a lot of in-depth about how rural-urban gaps need to be further, reduced. Rural development is very important. Things like poverty alleviation, inclusivity of society, and job creation. These are all very down to earth and things that affect ordinary people. That focus stays central to meetings that have a lot to cover to begin with. And I think lastly, I'll mention, as someone who covers and tries to understand Chinese foreign policy, the focus on collaborativeness, the focus on also the Global South, and specifically pointing out that the Global South holds the key, to development, to a better world. I think that recognition is something that more countries in the world can learn from.
Anna, so what topics, what issues you have focused on?
Well, for me, there are three things that I was very much interested during the two sessions. The first and foremost, I think, is the target GDP growth of China this year, and it's still the same as last year, which is 5%. And I think this is a very realistic goal, which make a balance between economic resilience and also structural changes that the government is introducing at the moment. And on the other hand, if this 5% is achievable, as we have seen last year, it's 5% and the China achieved it, and I think this year it will be achieved. And it's a very realistic goal in a sense that as you can see, there's a lot of challenges that China is facing. One of that would be there is a rise of protectionism, and there's also an impending trade war with the United States, given the policies of President Donald Trump. So I think this is very interesting, and this is very interesting not only for China, for me, but even for countries in ASEAN, which I belong, because I'm from the Philippines. So this is very interesting for us. On the other hand, I think the other which is always, I'm always amazed by this, is what you call, because for me, the two sessions actually represent what you call the people's democracy in China. It's like a bottom-up approach, because as you can see in the two session, all ethnic groups in China, all minorities in China are represented, and also the majority ethnic group are also represented, and all of them will be gathering in one hall and discussing about what they're going to do for the country within 1 year. And this is amazes me, because this is very different, I think, from any Western countries, or even what you call liberal democracy, that's very much dependent on what you call periodic election. But China, I think it has really a bottom-up approach, and and things are being discussed, which really comes from the grassroots going up. And I think the other one is much more about, of course, the AI, the development of high-tech technology. I think that is one of the focus of the current government, and that is the focus in the last 5 years. Another important aspect that I was very interested about is there was an emphasis actually, rather, on opening up. I think China is still trying to open up to the whole world, and and I think this is very important, because right now, as you can see, in the economy, the Chinese economy, it needs more capital coming from outside, or what you call foreign direct investment. And the more China will open up, I think that they will achieve that kind of goal. So these are the things that I was very interested in. And I think China is pretty much doing well. But of course, there are a lot of challenges, geopolitical tension, but I think it will achieve its target this year.
Right. And also, thank you. Also share with us, like, since, as you said, you are from the Southeast Asia. We know Southeast Asia, the ASEAN, for example, has been the largest trading partner of China for the recent years. So what's the media focus? What's their concern or their interest in the Chinese two sessions?
I think the interest of the ASEAN countries, first and foremost, is the target GDP growth, because it will impact the ASEAN countries because of the trade and exchanges. And as you have said, from both sides, China's largest trading partner is ASEAN, and in the same manner that all ASEAN countries' largest trading partner is China. So when you have a 5% growth, I think it gives us confidence from ASEAN that China will be doing good. Another thing I think is more on the digital aspect, like quantum computing, AI, and all of these things. And I think the more we trade on this with this regard, the more that ASEAN countries benefit, because there's also a transfer of technology, capital investment in different parts of ASEAN. So this is, I think, the most important for ASEAN at the moment, because as you can see, a lot of ASEAN countries are also very much focused on what you call high-tech development or high-tech innovation. And this is the game right now. It's really the game. AI, quantum computing, and all of these things. I think this is now the game, not only in ASEAN, but even across the world. Right?
Yes, also digital trade, as far as I know, like e-commerce between China and ASEAN countries. Zoon, you're from Pakistan, your home country media also, for sure. We can see that, and listen to that, some of the journalists from Pakistan, they were in Beijing, they were there to cover the stories. So what's their focus?
Well, firstly, I mean, as Anna also mentioned, there is a deep focus on understanding China's, what China can really provide and what to expect when it comes to collaboration with China through what we obviously note as the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. In that sense, artificial intelligence, high tech, even these, bilateral exchanges where Pakistani youth can be trained by Chinese companies and organizations to play a more vital role in our, what we hope is an increasingly digital economy, was obviously a key focus. A second perspective that I think a lot of Pakistani journalists and media are looking at is how China is achieving its balanced approach and effective results when it comes to more developmental goals, which means obviously rural revitalization, agricultural technology, poverty alleviation. These are aspects that are very central to Pakistan's cooperation with China, and something that we want to learn from, because essentially we are moving from one development paradigm to a very different one, the Chinese one, which is more about problem solving, value creation, and more creative solutions. This is where China-Pakistan cooperation is quite central. And I think obviously a lot of Pakistanis, Pakistani media, policymakers care a lot about China's stance when it comes to global governance. They care deeply about China sticking to, those core values that China and Pakistan have shared for a while, which means more inclusivity, better representation of developing countries, standing with causes for peace. This is something that has been very important for Pakistan, as we're also, members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and we care about real solutions to these issues and conflicts. And that was something that was also highlighted in Foreign Minister Wang Yi's, press conference, that China really wants true peace and recognition of, the root causes. That stance is something that deeply resonates with Pakistan, that has faced a lot of challenges in recent decades. And absolutely, when it comes to the economy's resilience and growth and how fast it's moved forward, maybe Pakistan is not right there where the Southeast Asian economies are, like the Philippines. But we do want to be closer to that, phase in our own development, where we can incorporate a lot of China's highest tech and most advanced aspects of its economy in our collaboration. But this is something that inspires Pakistan. We think of these things as achievable in the coming years.
Yeah, where to cooperate. Rick, before the show, we talked about briefly about, like, in particular, Western media coverage of the two sessions. Of course, growth target of 5%, around 5%. There were doubts about that. At the same time, we do know the Chinese government has talked about, this the policy support. For example, budget deficit of 4%, improvement from 3% last year, and also these like moderate loose monetary policy, meaning more support in terms of course, liquidity there, and of course consumption. There are challenges. Obviously, they are aware of that. What do you make of this? Last year, actually, this is the third year. The target has basically been made as around 5%. You are obviously in the business journalism. How do you make of that?
Right. Well, I think that it is realistic but somewhat flexible. Right now, I think that first of all, I think that the government is trying to fix some of the problems that are obvious right now, particularly in the banking system. There are two major problems that the government has acknowledged. One is in the banking system, and it's trying to do what it can do to prop up troubled banks. The second is on the demand side and trying to keep consumption going. So those are two major things that we're seeing. The third part, and we didn't see a lot of it in the two sessions, but I think it's going to be really important, is how to deal with the uncertainties that are coming because of trade. Look at what's happened in the United States. The stock market is in correction right now. It's plummeted in the past month, not only because of Donald Trump's tariffs, but because of the uncertainties that have been unleashed because of his going back and forth over tariffs, not only the tariffs that he has imposed, but putting tariffs on, then taking them off, then putting them back on, then taking them off.
Yeah.
Business like certainty in the world. And so it's very hard for the Chinese government right now to figure out how to deal with this. And so I think that what we're seeing is that the government in Beijing is trying to do a few things that it can do, but now it's also trying to gauge. So I think what we saw in the two sessions was some steps, but then also leaving itself some flexibility depending on what happens in the world, both what Donald Trump does, but also global reaction to it. We don't know how the economy is going to go in the world, what will happen with trade and with multilateral and bilateral relations around the world.
Well, exactly. Probably because of that, many people would say, having a target of around 5% for 2025 itself shows the confidence from the government. Yes, they are capable of doing that. That's some degree of confidence, to say the least. And you mentioned the stock market, of course, because of the tumbling in the U.S. stock market, we do see some capital probably arriving in the China market. You see the rise of the Chinese stock market over there. But of course, people also, I think the investors, they do see, and I think I see the confidence growing in the innovation in the industrial sector. For example, DeepSeek. Some people would even call the two sessions as DeepSeek sessions this year, Rick. So innovation. Innovation-driven growth. That's probably the government has been hoping for the growth model. From relying on export, heavy investment, to innovation-driven or based on consumption. So let's say it's making progress. Yeah.
I mean, one of the headlines in the Washington Post, and I'll paraphrase it, was 10 ways that China is leading the world in artificial intelligence. I mean, there were many more policy-oriented stories out of the two sessions in the United States than usual. Fewer political stories and more policy-oriented or economic-oriented. They weren't all positive, but there were a lot of stories on artificial intelligence. There were a lot of stories on innovation in there. Not just your typical U.S. versus China type stories.
So that's sort of a change, let's say. We are probably used to that kind of coverage. Sometimes through the ideological lens, through China-U.S. relationship, but now it's more focusing on the substance, let's say, the substantial, policy or progress or discussion in that respect. But of course, speaking of AI, Zoon, we have people often frame it as a competition between China and the U.S. That's more from, personally, I would say it's more from the U.S. Point of view. From the Chinese side, it's really catching up with the U.S. or, basically, you try, to be as innovative as possible to achieve whatever you can in that respect. I mean, DeepSeek, of course, the startup is a happy surprise, I would say, for the Chinese public as well as the government. I mean, for the world in a sense. We also know, related to that, people say six little dragons, competing with each other from Hangzhou, things like that. I do have a sense of the confidence, growing confidence in the Chinese side of okay, we can do that. We can make innovation in a different way, in the Chinese way. Do you have a similar understanding there?
Firstly, I'll just continue from one of the points that Rick made, that a lot of times, Western media coverage or think tanks in certain parts of the world are focused on geopolitics. And this time, yes, they did focus a lot on artificial intelligence because it cannot be ignored. Everyone in the world is talking about DeepSeek. This is a topic that cannot be, left under the rug. It is something that has come to the forefront, not just among governments, but ordinary people around the world. So I think China's strides that the country has made, that people have made, and DeepSeek being an example of it, are noticed by the world. And they also speak volumes about the fact that these, the kind of, the youth of today, China's youth, is much more confident, versed, ambitious in its own way. I don't see a lot of young Chinese people thinking constantly as you mentioned, about the US or the EU or this country or that country in terms of we want to be better than them. It's really about let's just start and let's continue. Let's be as good as possible. Let's see what resources we have. Let's learn from everybody wherever we can. That perspective is something that also makes it possible for China and Chinese youth to become as technologically savvy and positively ambitious as we are seeing today. Another fascinating aspect is that it's not just the Ivy Leagues of China, so to speak, that are producing such technologies and noticeable developments. It's actually all over the country. So it also speaks a lot about the investment the government and the universities consistently have made in improving the education sector, the opportunities and exposure open to young people. And that is something which is obviously an amalgamation, a synergy between policies, between education thinkers. There are so many foreign professors like Rick himself, that are in Chinese universities that are further expanding the horizons of Chinese youth, and so many foreign students as well. So China is really investing a lot from education policy to a positive perspective, to suitable policies in general, and being open-minded in order to achieve the success that we have seen. So I think, the fact that today China is leading in majority of the leading high-tech industries, as many think tanks in the world have covered, is the result of consistent effort, hard work, and a positive perspective, most importantly. It's not just about catching up, it's just about improving. And we have seen exponential improvement and growth in the last few years.
Yeah, it does bear fruit there. But let's move on a little bit to, you mentioned about the, geopolitics. Also, that's part of the focus for the global media there. Of course, from Foreign Minister Wang Yi's press conference, there's wide-ranging topics there being covered. Of course, it's also about overall the Chinese diplomacy or Chinese philosophy of how they look at the world, how they conduct business with other countries, for example. Some say, we do see consistency and probably stable or predictability of the Chinese foreign policy in terms of their relationship with other countries. Zoon, how do you characterize, the Chinese, let's say, global governance, their understanding of how the world should be governed there?
I was actually on a panel covering the press conference live. It is, as someone studying and working in Chinese foreign policy, the central focus for me personally, and obviously being as a foreigner as well. You couldn't have put it better. China has, exhibited through years of consistent messaging, expanding collaborations, that it is a source of stability, certainty, and opportunity. So I think if I had to use three words: stability, certainty, and opportunity. A lot of Western media covered, obviously US-China was a major focus. And there's a point where Foreign Minister Wang Yi is quoted saying that China is ready to fight till the end. But a majority of what was said whenever this topic was covered between China-US tensions and potential trade tensions, it was that we welcome the US to work with us. We expect and hope that the United States can play a more conducive role, which will also be good for US domestic economic ambitions. And that is a very different approach from what it's not that China sees the US or other countries that are threatening trade wars or see China as an adversary. China does not see them that way, but China hopes that they can also come on the negotiating table and realize that the world is interconnected. A second very important focus, and I briefly mentioned this before, is that China has been consistent about its stance, from the Belt and Road Initiative, obviously, to the global initiatives, development, civilizations, and security. China's perspective is a better world through multilateralism, through open exchanges, through understanding each other's unique vantage points and respecting them. There's also a point where he mentioned that China and the US are different. They shouldn't think of converting each other. And this is a perspective that the global South and developing countries have held for a very long time. Let's respect one another and think about the world at large and what's better for the world. And I think, even China's perspective highlighted about addressing diplomatically and realistically and in a sustained way conflicts. This is something that resonates with a vast majority of the world. So definitely China is focused, keeping the UN system at its center, which is also very vital.
Yeah, it's in the consistency as we said there. Speak of the China-U.S. relationship, Rick. We know that from the Chinese point of view, of course, they have been based on there are principles of equality, mutual respect, win-win cooperation. They have been talking about this, with Biden administration, now with the Trump administration. But of course, we talked about a little bit, tariffs from Trump on the Chinese side. There are for some goods already 40% in total. We don't know how much further it will go. And also from the Chinese side, people are asking, what's the ultimate goal of Trump? What is are we clear of his goal in terms of his China policy?
I don't even know if the Trump administration is clear. He promised 60% tariffs in his campaign. So I would say that's a possibility. But Donald Trump does what he wants to do when he wants to do it. And I think right now he wants respect from China, respect as he sees it. It's very hard to define. I see one of two roads over the next few months. I either see a wonderful big deal coming together with Donald Trump and Xi Jinping getting together in Beijing and shaking hands and the trade war being over and the two countries getting together. Or I see things falling apart and tariffs getting worse and tensions increasing and things looking bad for the world. And right now, I really can't tell which way to go. The problem is Donald Trump doesn't really give you a clue. And I think that the Chinese government has had a hard time figuring out how to respond to him because the traditional way the Chinese government responds, which is proportionately and in kind, is not the way you deal with Donald Trump. Because when you punch back, when he punches you and you punch back, he punches again. Yeah. And that's the way to have a long fist fight with him.
As we see between the U.S. and Canada, between U.S. and the Europeans, right? The talk of 200%.
Exactly. And China doesn't want to have a long fist fight. So I think that the only way is to figure out a way to have negotiations with him instead of a long, drawn-out fist fight over the next year.
Well, let me bring Anna. Of course, Philippines is an ally of the United States. We do see, of course, U.S. policy on Ukraine, for example. People that characterize that as a betrayal, use that as a pawn. Ultimately, they will abandon, the country. Of course, Philippines between China and the U.S. kind of a power politics. Philippines has its conflicts, disputes and sometimes conflicts with China. How do you look at the relationship there and the Chinese way of probably handling the conflicts there?
I think it's very obvious. The Chinese, when you talk about the South China Sea issue, the Chinese would want to have it resolved or address or manage the dispute in the South China Sea between the Philippines and China and other claimant states in a peaceful and through negotiation and open communication. I think that's very consistent for the Chinese. And of course, on our side, under a Marcos government, that is very challenging for the Chinese because that is not, I think, the current approach of the current administration of Marcos Jr. It's more about megaphone diplomacy. So that is the tension going on. But when you talk about the South China Sea under President Trump or a 2.0 Trump presidency, I see that Trump is more focused, I think, on trade and this trade war and tariffs and all of that. But I think there will be a little of this de-escalation when you talk about security, when you talk about military. And I think he will recalibrate the military spending being forwarded or being afforded to the Philippines.
Yes.
So in a way, we will have a little bit of probably.
Yeah, on that note, we are coming to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also watch us on the CGTN app on YouTube. Thank you for being with us. I'm Xu Qianduo. See you next time.